Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Simple Money, where we talk about it's kind of money and life, finance, and so forth, and we approach it from a different generational perspective. What it means to someone my age, what it means to folks my son David's age, and so forth. Today, our topic is: what does financial health mean to you? And I'll preface it by saying there are no right or wrong answers to this question. So it doesn't matter, right? It's all about perspective, and it matters kind of how you approach it and how you think about it is probably the most important thing. But Dave, why don't you start off? What does financial health mean to you?
Yeah, I kind of like this topic because healthy is such a interesting word. When I think of health, I first think of physical health, I guess. And I think everybody knows what it means to be physically healthy. You eat right, you work out, you exercise your brain, you get outside, things like that. And then when we're talking about financial health, like you said, it's going to be dependent on each person. Each person can have a different perspective and a different way that they think financially healthy means to them. Kind of the first thing I would think about being financially healthy from my perspective would be that we'd have, or somebody would have, some sort of emergency fund. So you have enough cash for the kind of random if in life, for that unexpected broken arm medical bill, for the car accident, whatever it might be. And I don't know what the right answer is for how much of a emergency fund you should have. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's more, maybe it's less. Again, that's kind of personal preference, but I forget what I was reading or talking to. Somebody said I was on this topic about an emergency fund and how much you should have. And it was interesting. I think somebody suggested 6 months. And the reason why they based 6 months for them was because they thought that if they lost their job, had to live off savings, it took somewhere between 3 to 5 months to secure a new job on average. So I thought that was an interesting perspective on how to look at it. And there was the stat that came out a few months ago, or it was recent. I saw it on Twitter, and it's how many people couldn't afford like $1,000 payment, a random $1,000 unexpected expense in their life. And it was over 50%. I think it was like 55 or 56% of Americans couldn't do that. So I think that's where I would start with what a financially healthy person would have in their back pocket would be an emergency fund of some.
Yeah, great point. We teach a lesson called the 4 steps to financial freedom, 4 steps of financial freedom. I actually don't think you've seen me do it, David.
I have not.
Step number 1 is just that, is build an emergency fund. And again, like you said, depending on who you talk to, it's 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. Now, it's going to vary depending on, of course, what lifestyle you lead and what you consider an important expense versus a non-important expense. But we're talking about health. And so I view health as what just makes you not be stressed about stuff. Yeah. Right. So, you can have all the money in the world, or you can have no money in the world and still be considered healthy. I don't think money equates to health per se, but I do think that the mindset that you have about money is what leads to the feeling of health and well-being around money, at least, right? I like your analogy. Well, not the analogy. When you talked first about, we all know what to do to make our bodies healthy. Sleeping, eating, working out, those kinds of things. What are those same dynamics for financial health? That's my ideas, but what do you think would be some comparable things to financial health that are like working out, eating well, and getting nice sleep and exercise? What would be the equivalent?
I don't know. I would say one would be just having goals about your finances. And again, it's a personal goal, but actually having a goal and maybe writing it down. That way you can achieve that goal. If you write it down and kind of make a weekly or monthly or yearly check in on that goal, make sure you're doing something to achieve that goal. I think that would be one thing where I'd consider a financial health. And that goal could be, build my emergency fund, right? And if you have a weekly, whatever check-in, a weekly amount that you want to put towards that, I think that's a way to achieve that goal and kind of relieve some of the stress or worry about finances, which leads to financial health, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to start. When we work out physically, we think about setting benchmarks, whether it's weight loss or weight gain, whether it's a number of reps, whatever that metric is. You can have the same sort of thing when it comes to finance. The metric might be 3 months, and how long it's going to take me to get there. I think that's one metric you can track is, people say save 10 to 15 to 20% of your income. I think that's an easy thing to say. If I make $4,000 a month, I save $400 a month. But that's after-tax money. And so it's more than actually 10% of what you make. So there's an interesting dynamic there. But I think you're right. Creating some habits around what the goals are. And then I think the habit of actually paying attention to it. I don't think you need to be someone who's on your phone all day long tracking the markets. or looking at your accounts. You only need to review it, in my opinion, from my perspective, maybe once a month and maybe even once a quarter. I think if you're doing the daily disciplines, you're saving, then I don't think in fact, I think it's actually detrimental to review stuff all the time. I think in some ways that creates stress as opposed to create health, if that makes sense. We have multiple tools that can help do that, which maybe we'll share at the end of some of those things that we use from the health perspective. So what else? You said there was some other thoughts you had. We've talked about now some metrics. We've talked about what it feels to feel healthy financially. What else, Dave, from your perspective, is important about this conversation?
I think another thing that's important about this conversation, and we've taught this through one of our classes, the cash and liability masterclass, is understanding your own personal cash flow. And I think that's important on your life and how you spend or save or whatnot. What we talk about, ideally you want to know at least what you bring in and what you're spending. I think there's a glaring obvious thing. If you're spending more than you make, that's unsustainable and that can't work in the long run, right? So I think just having a decent understanding of that is a sign of financial health. I wouldn't say I'm a big budget person or need to be a budget person, but I have a basic understanding of what comes in each month and what I spend my money on. And what I spend my money on is a personal choice, and that's a personal choice for you too. But at least I know that I am spending less than I make, and I know that I'm hitting some savings goals along the way because I'm doing that. I don't have to go tapping on credit cards or whatnot to finance my life.
Interesting point, because I do think that the word budget or cash flow management, or whatever the term might be of the day, does stress people out, right? I've heard many, many times, I don't want to be on a budget. It's not how I want to live my life. I'm living today for the moment, or I don't want to worry about all that kinds of stuff. And we can see that as evidenced by the fact that you talked about some of the numbers earlier, people that don't have $1,000, number of people that are unprepared for retirement in this country, which is obviously closer to my age than your age, is huge. I mean, it's something like 60% of the people are woefully unprepared for retirement. And again, we're not going to define what that means for everybody, but at a very basic level, it means you envision a life in front of you that you're not going to have.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So you say, I'm going to do this, but you can't financially afford to do it unless there's some other things that happen in your life. So anyway, now I can't quite remember where I was going with that, but it was the dynamic of, again, it's savings, it's the, that gap between what you're spending. But the good thing is I don't think you need to worry about the budget. Like you said, I do think it's great if people can budget. There's tons of apps on the internet. You can do all those kind of things. You can track every penny. If that's what you're into, do that if that works for you. I also agree with you. I don't think it's necessary. I do think you have basic money awareness, what's going in, what's coming out. Other thing I'll point out is that awareness is really powerful. So the idea of being aware of whether it's money or habits or the way you react to other things in the world, all these are awareness tricks. So one of the other things that I encourage people to do is to just be aware of what's happening in your life when it pertains to money. Be aware if you have triggers. Like if you get to Friday afternoon and you're like, it's been a rough week, I'm going to go and drop $120 on sushi and beer, and that's your trigger, maybe that's great if that's part of what you want to do, but maybe it isn't. Or I'm feeling really great about the week. I got a wonderful new sale. I deserve a new pair of shoes. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. But so being aware of the things and triggers that create certain activities around money, I think is also important. The dynamic of these things oftentimes comes from our family habits. Being aware of, if you can pause and look back and say, where does my money imprint come from? It comes from our parents, it comes from schoolmates, it comes from other people in society, it comes from TV, from Twitter, yada, yada, yada. But being aware of influences that may be influencing you that are not important to you is another awareness trick out there. So anyway, where do you get information from, Dave, sort of on a basic, weekly, monthly basis around finance?
I've read a decent amount of books written by Rick Edelman, which has given me some sort of foundation on money and things like that. I do read a lot on just random Google. Google is a great source, and I'll read stuff there. I've subscribed to some podcasts that I'll listen to and some newsletters and things like that.
Is there a particular podcast you might recommend to our audience?
I've listened to How I Built This, which is not necessarily a money podcast, but just kind of business leaders or business people who built businesses and kind of giving their insight on how they did it and things like that. And I always find that fascinating. And I wouldn't say that's a money podcast, but it's there. I listen to Dave Ramsey every now and again. And yeah, it's kind of from there. And then there's a lot of information on whether you're following random influencers on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it might be. Not saying all those are 100% accurate, but there is some truth and learning out there on those platforms as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. There's, in some ways, I guess I'm the same. I read various things, but I'll also say this, read stuff and take everything with not a grain of salt necessarily, but with the idea that that's not all the information and it doesn't apply to everybody. So take what's valuable to you from that and then talk to other people. I learned so much from other people around me. That's where I've learned most of my stuff, is just from mentors and other folks in my life as well. Was there anything else, Dave, that you wanted to share on this part?
Yeah, I kind of thought about this, and I don't know that this is necessarily being financially healthy, but I think you mentioned being aware and learning. And so I kind of wanted to tie into that. Learning one is great, and you want to stay up to date with kind of topics and things like that. I jotted down that you've sought advice from somebody important in your life around some sort of financial topic. I think sometimes we get so bogged down by, we can do it all by ourselves. And maybe you just want a different perspective. It doesn't have to be good advice. It could just be another perspective, whether that's from a friend, family member, or somebody in finances that is there to guide you on your financial journey. I think it's important to have conversations around it and kind of expand your experience around money and what other people think about it too. We need to be aware of when that plan doesn't go according to what you thought and it goes the exact opposite way. You lose your job, you lost all your investments, whatever it might be. You're aware that could happen and you're taking on the proper amount of risk for yourself and you're protected in certain situations if that happens. So I don't know. I just think it's important to also be aware of the flip side of the coin of what if things don't go according to your plan.
Great point, right? So we learned a lot from the crypto, from related industries that sprung out of some of the crypto type of stuff, and it's not all good, but there's risk in everything that you do. And sometimes you lose money and you never thought you're losing money because you were chasing something, as we've oftentimes experienced. All right, just here in the last minute or so, I will mention a tool that we use called Savology. So, if you're listening to this, whether it's close to time recording or many years in the future, doesn't matter. That tool's great. We're happy to share with you. Reach out and we'll share. In fact, we'll probably put it in the show notes and post a link to Savology. It's a free tool that we offer to our friends and our clients. Any last words, Dave? Any last pieces of advice you want to pass along?
I don't think so.
Got it. I will wrap up with this then. So I mentioned the 4 steps of financial freedom. Get a reserve fund. Pay off all your non-preferred debt. Non-preferred debt is, any consumer credit cards, car loans, student loans, anything other than mortgage. The number 3 is build massive liquidity, right? So massive liquidity means different things to different people, but all your extra money, once you've achieved 1 and 2, is just to go into building liquidity, retirement accounts, investment accounts, savings accounts, whatever, right? And then the final step is make a decision at some point if you pay off your large debt, which is your mortgage. Once you have enough money to retire your mortgage, pay it off, but you're now free. Right now you may have the choice. Doesn't mean you pay off your mortgage. Just means you have the choice to pay it off or not pay it off. And that's a different financial decision. So this kind of education, like interest, compounds over time. It just grows and you add little bits and pieces. So cool. All right, Dave, anything? You good?
Thank you. I'm good.
All right. Thank you all for listening in, and we appreciate it. We'll see you on another episode very soon. Thanks for tuning in to Simple Money.